He arrives with a crowd at his back and a silence in his pockets. Delegation after delegation, aides and executives in press suits, confidence with prepared lines, and then the small but conspicuous ritual that has come to define diplomacy in a digital age. The handing over of personal devices, phones are collected, laptops are stripped of non-essential software, connections are cordoned off. What should be a seamless stream of messages, calls, and live updates becomes instead a choreography of caution. For anyone who has watched the modern presidency, the image is jarring. In an era when leaders trade ideas at the speed of a notification, the leader's team is asked to step into an environment that is by design and necessity constrained. The simple act of leaving a smartphone in a secure pouch is not merely an operational detail. It is a visible reminder that power and vulnerability now travel together, that where policy and profit meet, information itself has become an asset to be guarded. Security protocols are exhaustive and granular. Delegation members are issued temporary devices, scrubbed phones that host only a limited set of approved applications, government-issued laptops provisions for short-term, minimal-risk use, and encrypted communications gear-routed through secured channels. Internet access is mediated by vetted systems. Messages that would normally appear as instant glances across the room are delayed, routed through secure hubs, or delivered face-to-face. What might look like inconvenience to observers is, in security parlance, risk mitigation, a practical shield against the possibility that anything entering the host country's networks could be observed, intercepted, or manipulated. Behind those measures lies a persistent assumption within Washington's security apparatus: treat foreign networks and devices as potentially compromised. The logic is straightforward. Modern espionage is not always dramatic. It can be a quiet infection in bed. In firmware, a subtle redirection of traffic, or the silent siphoning of metadata. High-profile visits are valuable not only for the messages exchanged on the main stage, but for the incidental data trails they create, location pings, schedule footprints, and the chatter of aides coordinating last-minute details. For that reason, many U.S. delegations arrive in a quasi-knowledge mode, communicating in bursts, relying on encrypted couriers, and accepting the operational friction that comes with deliberate isolation. Those frictions are not academic. Officials who are used to making decisions with the tap of a screen suddenly have to plan around delays. Negotiations that would normally hinge on immediate back-and-forth consultations are structured differently. Staff members carry external batteries, extra SIM-free devices, and stacks of printed material. They rehearse contingency plans, and they are constantly reminded to assume the environment is hostile until proven otherwise. From Beijing's perspective, the picture reads differently. Chinese officials reject sweeping accusations of unlawful surveillance. They point to domestic laws designed, they say, to protect personal information and to prevent unauthorized intrusions. The diplomatic language is both firm and procedural, appeals to sovereignty, references to legal frameworks, and reminders that national security, like trade or foreign policy, follows a set of codified rules. For a visiting delegation, that insistence of innocence coexists with an atmosphere of mutual suspicion. Both sides enter the same room knowing that the other has reasons to be wary. The gulf between those positions is more than headlines and talking points. It is a structural feature of how two powerful states now interact. Even when leaders sit down to negotiate, a layer of distrust persists in the background, shaping each decision. What hardware to bring, how to route a message, who speaks on the record, and who is left to whisper. Technology amplifies the stakes and tightens the choreography. That gulf is echoed in Beijing's public statements during such visits. There is a recurring refrain about the cost of disengagement, a plea for respectful coexistence, and a projection of mutual benefit if channels remain open. At one point, Chinese officials said, if the two countries do not engage, it will only lead to misunderstandings and misjudgments, heading toward conflict and confrontation, and will even jeopardize the world. They followed that with a broader appeal. Both China and the United States are undeniably major global powers. We cannot change one another, but we can change the way we interact. The primary objective here is to consistently uphold a sincere attitude of mutual respect, firmly maintain the fundamental bottom line of peaceful coexistence, and actively strive for the promising prospect of mutually beneficial win-win cooperation. We believe this is in the interest of the people of both countries and aligns with the expectations of the international community. Those words sound in places like the language of summits and state visits, aspirational, measured, repetitive by design. Yet they sit alongside a set of concrete grievances that Beijing presses at every opportunity, accusations about biased reporting on defense policy, condemnations of foreign interference, and sharp warnings on what it calls core interests. On Taiwan, the rhetoric is unambiguous. Chinese officials reiterated that the Taiwan question is the core of China's core interest and the first red line that must not be crossed in China-U.S. relations. The One China principle is a basic norm of international relations and a universal consensus of the international community. They added, adhering to the One China principle naturally entails opposing Taiwan independence separatism. Any words or actions challenging UN General Assembly Resolution 2758 are attempts to undermine the foundations of the post-war international order and interfere in China's internal affairs, and they are doomed to total failure. That red line language is not mere prose. It has real diplomatic consequences. For American officials, every engagement with Taiwan diplomatic contact, support for security ties, or gestures of political recognition is weighed against a matrix of strategic, legal, and domestic political considerations. For Chinese leaders, the preservation of that principle is tied to national identity and regime legitimacy. The tension is durable precisely because it sits at the intersection of policy, history, and national narrative. And the scope of Chinese public comment during the visit extends beyond bilateral issues. Beijing voiced positions on crises across the globe, an appeal for de-escalation in the Middle East, a rebuke of perceived U.S. overreach, and dramatic criticisms of actions taken by other states. The history of the Middle East has repeatedly shown the world that force is not the solution to problems. Resorting to military confrontation will only fuel new hatred and brew new crises. China reiterates its call for an immediate cessation of military operations to prevent further escalation and avoid the spillover of the conflict, the statement read. Later, it added, this U.S. report distorts China's defense policy, sows discord globally, and seeks excuses to maintain military hegemony. China firmly rejects this biased narrative. In a particularly stark claim, Chinese remarks accused unnamed forces of an extraordinary act and condemned it in strong terms. Killing Iran's supreme leader violates Iran's sovereignty and security and tramples the UN Charter's principles and basic international norms. China firmly opposes and condemns this. We urge an immediate halt to military action to prevent further escalation and to maintain regional and global peace. Whether those words refer to a hypothetical or a concrete event, they underscore the zeal with which Beijing frames its foreign policy positions as defenders of a rules-based order and as counterweights to what it portrays as unilateral moves. The scope of criticism extends further still. Beijing singled out actions it views as violations of international norms in the Americas, pointing to a dispute involving Venezuela with unusually personal language. We express grave concern over the U.S. side's forcible detention and deportation of President Maduro and his wife. These actions by the U.S. clearly violate international law and the basic norms governing international relations, as well as the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. China urges the U.S. to ensure the personal safety of President Maduro and his wife, immediately release them, stop subverting the Venezuelan government, and resolve issues through dialogue and negotiation. In another rhetorical tilt, China questioned historical USA conduct in and around the Panama Canal with a pointed, almost incredulous cascade of questions. Who occupied the Panama Canal for so long, launched an armed invasion of Panama, and wantonly trampled upon its sovereignty, and dignity. Who is coveting the Panama Canal, attempting to turn an international waterway that should be permanently neutral into their own private canal, and showing contempt for the sovereignty of regional countries? The answer is self-evident. Those lines are illustrative of a broader strategic posture. Beijing mixes appeals for cooperation with sharp-edged critiques of USA policy. It frames itself alternately as a champion of international law, a defender of sovereignty, and a critic of what it characterizes as foreign interference. The result is a diplomatic script that seeks to balance reassurance with deterrence. Back in the practical realm of meetings and schedules, the security choreography continues to shape outcomes. U.S. intelligence concerns, described in Washington's internal assessments as persistent and multifaceted, mean that high-level visits are not simply a matter of who sits beside whom for dinner. Security teams map out every movement, vet venues, and vet local vendors. Hotel Wi-Fi is treated as hostile terrain. Delegation itineraries include secure pockets for classified discussions, and unclassified conversations are held with the understanding that they may be overheard. For negotiators, the calculus is one of trade-offs. The value of face-to-face diplomacy weighed against the operational and informational risks of being in a high surveillance. The enduring paradox is clear. Two of the globe's most consequential powers meet in rooms where old-fashioned protocols, guarded couriers, in-person handoffs, and careful note-taking sit alongside modern theater, joint statements, photo ops, and live translations. The optics of a summit show leaders at ease, conversing across cultural and political divides. The logistics reveal a quiet, constant vigilance. Both are true, both are essential to understand. Minding what passes for normal statecraft in this age for practitioners, the answer is not to retreat from engagement, but to make that engagement more resilient. That requires both sides to manage risk without allowing risk to become an excuse for disengagement. It means clear rules of behavior, robust technical safeguards, and continuing diplomatic channels that can absorb missteps before they metastasize. As one official put it in private remarks, the absence of phones should not be mistaken for the absence of conversation. The medium changes, the need to listen does not. Still, rhetoric and reality sometimes run on different tracks. Beijing's public admonitions about third-party behavior, its insistence on red lines, and its wide-ranging critiques from the Middle East to Latin America to the Pacific are intended for many audiences: domestic citizens, foreign partners, and global institutions. Washington's caution around technology and surveillance is aimed at protecting not online wide secrets, but also competitive advantage and individual privacy. Neither side in public appears eager to cede rhetorical ground. In the end, what outsiders witness in those secure phone pouches and scrubbed laptops is not just a tactical precaution. It is a symbol of the contemporary balance between connectivity and control. It captures a moment when information is both commodity and vulnerability, when the ability to communicate instantly is matched by the need to know when you must not. The challenge for both capitals is to keep channels open without trading away security, to negotiate on substance without allowing technology to set the terms. As the visit proceeds, the choreography continues. Delegations move through secured rooms, briefings are staggered, and public statements are parsed for nuance. Behind the scenes, aides draft language, technical teams monitor connections, and senior leaders weigh gestures that might ease tensions or exacerbate them. There are moments of war, carefully framed, hard lines firmly restated, and the occasional mutual recognition that despite everything, the world benefits when the two sides find ways to cooperate. And so the procession of people and posture goes on, a modern ritual of statecraft shaped as much by silicon and software as by strategy and substance. If there is a single lesson in the scene of leaders arriving with empty pockets of technology, it is that diplomacy in the digital age requires both technical cunning and the old-fashioned capacity to sit down and talk. The devices may be off, the stakes are not. In the space between gestures and guarded measures, one argument keeps recurring: disengagement is rarely a path to security. Beijing put it plainly, if the two countries do not engage, it will only lead to misunderstandings and misjudgments, heading toward conflict and confrontation, and will even jeopardize the world. That appeal for dialogue, for mutual respect, for coexistence is as much a diplomatic prescription as it is a political imperative. Whether that prescription is followed depends on choices made far from the cameras, on the safeguards governments build, the conversations they permit, and the willingness of leaders to accept friction as part of the price of staying connected. In the meantime, those empty pockets make for a powerful image. Leaders at the center of global power, surrounded by the tools that once defined modern life, now reduced to props in a theater of precaution. They remind us that in a world where data flows incessantly, sometimes the most strategic action is to slow down, secure what must be secured, and then speak deliberately, carefully, and with the knowledge that what is said in private may shape what is done in public. That is the calculus that underpins this visit, a careful balancing act between the promise of cooperation and the reality of competition, between rhetorical appeals and operational concerns, between the need to be heard and the need to be protected. The devices will return, conversations will continue, and the diplomacy of the moment will be cataloged in statements and press notes. But the sight of an entire delegation working within carefully defined digital boundaries will remain a vivid shorthand for how the world now negotiates power. Cautious, connected, and acutely aware that the path to stability often runs through a gauntlet